The ashen outcast of Star Shelter. In the outer spiral arm of the galaxy, where mapped space frayed into uncertainty and the light of civilized systems thinned into lonely streaks, there drifted a structure so vast it seemed less constructed than inevitable. It was called Star Shelter. It did not orbit a world, it replaced one. Forged from the fused remnants of shattered moons and bound together with gravitic spines thicker than continents, Star Shelter sprawled across vacuum like a metallic nebula caught in stillness. Rivers of stellar plasma coursed through transparent conduits along its exterior hull. Captive suns, miniaturized and shackled in spherical reactors, burned within its core, their radiance filtered into wavelengths suitable for 10,000 species. Docking arrays stretched outward like skeletal fingers, welcoming vessels of every conceivable design. Crystalline arcs that sang as they drifted, organic ships that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, angular warcraft built in colder, harsher regions of space. Star Shelter was sanctuary and crossroads, archive and asylum. Refugees from planets swallowed by black holes found quarters along its inner ring. Scholars from civilizations whose stars were dying established observatories near its energy heart. Merchants traded relics from extinct empires beneath vaulted halls lined with gravity-tuned gardens. Mystics drifted in zero-G monasteries, meditating upon the hum of constrained fusion. If the galaxy had a neutral ground, a place where old grudges were temporarily sheathed and survival outweighed pride, it was Star Shelter. And at its core, buried beneath layers of alloy and law, it kept a monster. 300 years earlier, the name Varkesh had been whispered with a dread that transcended language. To the aquatic choir of Pelithar, he was remembered as a shadow that bowled their oceans into screaming vapor. To the silicon-bound architects of Dora's prime, he was the force that reduced their glass cities to molten memory. Among the scattered remnants of Halcyon's people, he was not spoken of at all, because there were too few left to keep the name alive. He had not always been called the Ash Tyrant. Long before coalition fleets had rallied beneath banners of necessity, Varkesh had been something far older, a stellar dragon born within a supernova cradle. His kind did not hatch from eggs warmed by soil or flame. They coalesced from cosmic violence, matter and energy twisting together until awareness ignited in the heart of collapse. Their wings spanned kilometers. Their scales were layered with metallic crystal that absorbed radiation and exhaled plasma. They were not predators in the conventional sense. They were forces. For millennia, Varkesh's kind had roamed the volatile regions of star nurseries, feeding upon unstable solar flares and drifting comets, their passage recorded in the auroras of developing worlds. They were destructive only in the way lightning was destructive, immense, impersonal, magnificent. Until expansion reached them. The coalition of 12 empires had not begun as a military force. It had been an alliance of ambition, 12 burgeoning civilizations united to accelerate progress through shared technology and mutual defense. Their need for energy was insatiable. As their territories expanded, they harvested stars, not entire systems at once, but incrementally siphoning hydrogen and helium through stellar extraction arrays. They tamed suns with megastructures, caged fusion with precision mathematics. In doing so, they destabilized the supernova clusters that served as nurseries for stellar dragons. Nest sites collapsed, radiation flows shifted. Entire gravitational ecosystems, intricate balances invisible to most sapient observers, were torn apart for efficiency. Varkesh had watched the first of his kind dissolve in a prematurely triggered nova cascade. He had endured the second. When the third cluster was mined to extinction, something ancient and incandescent broke inside him. His retaliation was neither surgical nor strategic. It was apocalyptic. He descended upon extraction arrays like a living solar flare, wings eclipsing orbital rings. His firestorms overloaded containment matrices, triggering chain reactions that devoured entire fleets. He tore through warships as though they were brittle shells, molten breath carving lines of devastation visible from neighboring systems. Coalition propaganda would later frame him as a tyrant seeking dominion. The truth was less noble and more terrible. He was grieving in the only language he possessed. And grief wielded by a creature who fed on stars was catastrophic. The war lasted 47 standard years. Coalition armadas fell. Planetary shields collapsed beneath thermal barrages that turned oceans into atmospheric scars. Civilizations that had once argued trade tariffs now coordinated desperate evacuation protocols. The Ash Tyrant became a rallying cry, then a curse, then a justification for measures previously considered unthinkable. In the 48th year, the Coalition unveiled Project Nullspire. It was not a weapons. It was a prison. Engineered in secrecy at the heart of a neutron star's remnant, nullspire technology manipulated localized gravity fields with such intensity that even stellar plasma could be constrained. It required the sacrifice of 3 capital systems to power its activation. It required bait. They targeted the final supernova cluster still intact. When Varkesh arrived to defend it, they triggered the trap. Gravity folded. Space itself seemed to inhale. Varkesh's wings snapped against invisible walls. His roar tore through vacuum, a vibration so profound it registered as seismic activity on distant moons. He fought not with strategy but with fury, unleashing blasts capable of splitting continents. The nullspire held. By the time the gravitational maelstrom subsided, the ash tyrant was bound in layered singularity chains, his energy absorption suppressed by oscillating dampeners tuned precisely to his biological frequencies. The coalition had not killed him. They had humiliated him. And then they brought him to Star Shelter. His prison chamber lay at the station's core, beyond security corridors monitored by sentient algorithms and guarded by automated defense lattices. The null void field within was calibrated to prevent stellar ignition. The temperature hovered just below the threshold required for his metabolism to flare into full potency. Gravity anchors pinned his wings in a half-folded sprawl that denied both comfort and dignity. Visitors could observe him through reinforced gravitic panes, transparent yet stronger than planetary crust. They came in droves. School groups floated past on guided platforms, instructors narrating sanitized histories of the Dragon War. Merchants paused between trade negotiations to gaze upon the subdued Leviathan. Survivors of scorched worlds pressed trembling appendages to the barrier, their grief hardening into hatred that sustained them. Varkesh endured it all. For the first decade, he raged. His fire lashed uselessly against dampeners. His talons carved furrows in alloy that self-repaired within moments. His roars reverberated through Star Shelter's infrastructure, rattling habitation domes and causing diplomatic complaints. In the second decade, he tested the prison with calculated force, mapping its parameters, searching for weakness. The nullspire technology adapted in real time. By the 50th year, his outbursts grew infrequent. By the 100th, he ceased trying to break free. Coalition analysts interpreted this as submission. They were wrong. It was exhaustion. Time moved differently for a creature born in stellar collapse. 3 centuries was not eternity, but it was long enough to calcify memory, long enough for rage to cool into something heavier. Shame. The galaxy changed around him. Empires rose and fractured. Species once dependent on coalition protection achieved independence, trade routes shifted, technological paradigms evolved. Star Shelter expanded, its outer rings refurbished to accommodate newly contacted civilizations. Varkesh remained constant, a monument to triumph over terror. Few questioned whether perpetual display was justice or spectacle. Fewer still considered what 300 years of isolation did to a mind designed to navigate cosmic vastness. No one asked whether the galaxy had provoked him first. Then came the humans. His vessel arrived without fanfare, an asymmetrical craft with hull plating mismatched in color and composition. Registry codes identified it as Civilian Exploratory Class, Origin, Sol Sector. Humans had joined the coalition scarcely 2 decades earlier. Their population numbers were modest, their technological contributions promising but unproven. To most citizens of Star Shelter, humans were curiosities, short-lived bipeds from a temperate world orbiting an unremarkable G-type star. Elias Rowan disembarked carrying a data slate, a duffel, and an expression that hovered somewhere between determination and apprehension. He was not a soldier. His posture lacked the rigid bearing of military discipline, nor was he a high-ranking diplomat adorned with ceremonial insignia. His clothing was practical, slightly worn, marked with the insignia of Earth's interstellar outreach program. He spent his first week on Star Shelter not touring its marvels, but requesting archival access. Coalition clerks, accustomed to grand research proposals and political lobbying, found his query peculiar. He wanted the complete psychological and behavioral records of Varkesh the Ash Tyrant. Purpose, the intake AI inquired. Rehabilitation assessment, Elias replied. There was a pause measurable in milliseconds, yet heavy with incredulity. Clarify. I'd like to evaluate his potential for release under supervised guardianship. The AI routed his request to organic oversight. The Council of Starshelter convened in a chamber suspended above a central gravity well, a symbolic reminder of the forces they claimed to manage. 12 primary delegates represented the founding coalition empires. Dozens of secondary observers occupied peripheral tiers. Ilias stood alone at the chamber's center. He felt small, not merely in stature, though many delegates towered in forms that defied terrestrial anatomy, but in political weight. Humanity's vote within the coalition was advisory at best. They were newcomers, beneficiaries of established order. The crystalline delegate from Theskar resonated first. You request custodial guardianship of the entity designated Varkesh. Oh yes. The request is irrational. Possibly. A ripple of dissonant amusement passed through the chamber. You misunderstand, the delegate continued. The beast is not a pet. Ilias resisted the urge to fidget. I understand perfectly. You've caged him for 300 years. He hasn't attempted escape in 299. He cannot, hissed the arthropodal representative of Velkrin, mandibles clicking. Ilias tilted his head slightly, or he has chosen not to. That stilled them not because the suggestion was convincing, but because it implied something uncomfortable. Agency. Another delegate's voice flowed like liquid metal. Even if containment fatigue has induced passivity, release presents unacceptable risk. I'm not proposing unrestricted release, Ilias clarified. I'm proposing supervised rehabilitation under legally binding oversight. I'll assume full responsibility. The incredulity was palpable. Oh yes. Your species has not yet endured a full galactic cycle of membership. Your authority is negligible. I'm aware. Then explain your audacity. Ilias inhaled slowly. Because eternal punishment without review isn't justice, it's inertia. Murmurs spread. He continued, voice steady despite the weight of alien scrutiny. You defeated him, you proved your strength. For 3 centuries you've displayed him as proof of unity. But unity against a common enemy doesn't last once the enemy stops fighting. The Theskar delegate's facets refracted chamber light in sharp angles. You sympathize with genocide. No, Ilias said firmly. I study trauma. On my world, we've committed atrocities against each other for far smaller provocations. Sometimes the most dangerous creatures are simply the most wounded. And you presume to heal a stellar dragon. I presume to try. Laughter echoed in frequencies that caused the gravity well to shimmer. The council denied his request that day. And the next. And the next. Humans possessed a trait the galaxy struggled to quantify: stubborn compassion. Ilias returned every cycle with refined proposals. He cited data from the prison logs, declining aggression metrics, reduced metabolic flare patterns. He presented comparative studies of apex predator rehabilitation from Earth's own history. He argued that isolation of a hypersocial or hyperexpansive intelligence could induce catatonic withdrawal mistaken for compliance. 300 years in a box, he said during one hearing. You'd call that torture if it were done to one of your own. He is not one of our own, a delegate replied coldly. Exactly. The implication lingered. He proposed a trial relocation to an uninhabited system. He offered to fund the endeavor through Earth's exploratory grants. He volunteered himself as primary liaison, fully aware that failure would not merely cost him his life, but potentially condemn humanity's reputation. Privately, several counselors questioned his sanity. Publicly, they indulged him out of curiosity. Why would a fragile species risk itself for a being synonymous with annihilation? Meanwhile, within the null void chamber, Varkesh sensed the shifts. He did not receive direct feeds from council proceedings, but fluctuations in observation schedules and guard rotations registered in his peripheral awareness. There was a difference in the way visitors looked at him, less assured, more speculative. On the 112th day since Ilias' arrival, the human requested visitation access. The chamber's outer corridor hummed as security fields adjusted. Ilias stepped onto the viewing platform, palms damp despite environmental controls. Up close, Varkesh was overwhelming. Even subdued, he filled the chamber like a collapsed star forced into architecture. His scales were layered plates of darkened metallic crystal, fissures glowing faintly where suppressed plasma strained against dampeners. One wing lay twisted at an unnatural angle, a relic of the Nullspire's initial crush. His eyes, when they opened, were molten gold threaded with deeper crimson. They focused on the small figure beyond the barrier. Most visitors recoiled under that gaze. Ilias did not. He stepped closer to the pane. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Varkesh's voice reverberated, not through air, but through the conductive materials of the chamber itself. You are new. It was not a question. Yes, Ilias replied quietly. You do not carry hatred. I wasn't there. A pause. You come to observe the fallen tyrant. I came to talk. A low vibration coursed through the floor, amusement, perhaps, or disbelief. 300 years of voices have not required my response. I'm not here to curse you. Then you waste your breaths. Maybe, Ilias met the dragon's gaze steadily, but I think you're tired of silence. Something flickered in those molten eyes, an emotion too complex to categorize at a glance. You presume much, fragile one. Probably. Another pause, longer this time. Why? Varkesh asked at last. It was a simple word, heavy with centuries. Ilias rested a hand lightly against the gravitic pane, because no one wins if you stay here forever. The dragon's gaze did not soften, but it did not turn away. Outside the chamber, unseen by both, observation algorithms recorded an anomaly. For the first time in 87 years, Varkesh's metabolic readings spiked, not in rage but in engagement. The final council hearing convened under heightened security. Ilias stood once more at the chamber's center, exhaustion lining his features but resolve unbroken. He had done what no strategist, no interrogator, no survivor had attempted. He had listened. I will not argue that he is innocent, Ilias said. He destroyed worlds. He ended lives on a scale I can barely comprehend. But your own archives confirm the destabilization of his species' nesting clusters. The first strike in that war was economic expansion. That does not absolve retaliation, the Velkrin delegate snapped. No, Ilias agreed, it contextualizes it. Context does not resurrect the dead. Neither does eternal imprisonment. Silence descended. He drew a breath. You've proven you can cage a dragon. That was never in doubt after Nullspire. The question is whether you can evolve beyond needing him as a symbol. A crystalline facet refracted sharply. You risk your species standing for this. Oh yes. Why? Ilias hesitated not from uncertainty, but from the weight of honesty. Because if we only ever respond to violence with containment and fear, we guarantee it will happen again, with someone else. The vote that followed was narrow. One by one, delegates cast their positions into the gravity well's luminous interface. Affirmation pulsed in green, rejection flared in red. For a moment, the chamber was a constellation of indecision. Then the final tally resolved. Approval by a single margin. Not from faith, from curiosity. The announcement rippled through Starshelter like a shockwave. News feeds erupted, markets fluctuated. Survivors' advocacy groups issued statements of outrage. Some threatened to withdraw from coalition agreements. Others waited with morbid anticipation, convinced disaster was imminent. Security teams mobilized around the null void chamber. Ilias stood on the viewing platform once more as gravity chains recalibrated. Varkesh watched him. They have agreed, Ilias said softly. The dragon's eyes narrowed slightly. Agreed to what? To let you live. The chamber trembled as containment fields shifted to standby. You would free the Ash Tyrant. Varkesh's tone carried no triumph, only incredulity. I'd relocate you, supervised, far from populated systems. And you believe I will comply? Ilias met that molten gaze without flinching. I believe you're tired of being a monument. Silence stretched between them, thick as compressed starlight. Outside across the galaxy, billions tuned in. Gravity chains disengaged with a sound like mountains grinding. For the first time in 3 centuries, Varkesh flexed his wings without restraint. The most hated dragon in Starshelter was no longer bound. And standing before him, small, unarmored, utterly mortal, was a human who had dared to ask whether a force of destruction could become something else. The galaxy held its breath. And in that suspended moment between past and possibility, it stood stunned. A house for fire. Ilias did not bring Varkesh to Earth. The council had suggested it, tentatively, diplomatically, as a gesture of trust in humanity's conviction. A gesture that would have placed the Ash Tyrant within reach of 8 billion fragile lives. Ilias refused without hesitation. Earth had known war. It had known extinction events and near misses and self-inflicted catastrophes. It had earned its scars honestly, but it did not need a wounded star dragon orbiting its skis as an experiment in cosmic rehabilitation. Instead, Ilias purchased something forgotten. The moon had no official name, only a string of survey coordinates buried in Coalition archives. It orbited a dim orange K-type star at the ragged fringe of mapped space. The system had been catalogued, deemed resource poor, and abandoned in favor of richer territories. Its lone gas giant bore faint rings of ice. Its inner planets were scorched remnants. The moon itself was little more than rock and silence. Its gravity was stable, its crust was thick, its atmosphere was thin but chemically alterable. It was barren. It was perfect. Ilias named it Hearths. Not publicly, not in coalition registries, just in his own logs. If one was going to house living fire, it deserved a hearth. The transfer was broadcast across interstellar networks, whether Ilias wanted it or not. The coalition framed it as transparency. In truth, it was liability management. If the dragon reverted to devastation, no one would be able to claim ignorance. Billions tuned in not out of hope but anticipation. Commentators dissected the spectacle in real time. Containment fields reducing to 30%. Nullspire anchors disengaging. Metabolic suppression dampeners offline. The camera drones orbiting the transport convoy kept a careful distance. Warships flanked the procession, ostensibly as escort, though their weapons arrays were powered to readiness. Fail-safes layered upon fail-safes. Kill-switch contingencies debated but never officially confirmed. Ilias stood on the landing plane of Hearth alone. The habitation dome behind him gleamed faintly in the dim orange light of the system's star. It was small, designed for one human occupant and minimal equipment. Atmospheric processors the size of cargo haulers hummed nearby, already beginning the long work of thickening air from trace gases trapped in regolith. Wind skimmed across stone, lifting dust in restless spirals. No fleet hung in orbits. No planetary shields shimmered overhead. No artillery batteries dotted the horizon. Just rock machinery, a man. And the shadow that fell across him. Varkesh descended like a fragment of night torn free from the void. Even weakened by centuries of suppression, he dwarfed the habitation dome. His wings stretched wide as city blocks, membranes scarred where nullspire gravity had crushed them. His scales bore the dull sheen of metal long deprived of polish. Veins of faint magmalite pulsed beneath blackened plates, dimmer than legends described yet unmistakably alive. When he landed, the impact cracked stone and sent tremors racing across the plain. The watching galaxy leaned closer to their screens. Ilias did not kneel. He did not raise his hands in surrender, nor did he posture in defiance. He simply stood. "You're free," he said. The dragon's head lowered until one molten eye, vast, elliptical, threaded with ember light, filled Ilias' world. Varkesh's voice rolled outward like distant tectonic plates grinding. "You are either brave or suicidal." Dust swirled around Ilias' boots. He squinted against the heat radiating from scales that could melt battleships. "Probably both." A faint rumble vibrated through the ground. It might have been a growl. It might have been the ghost of laughter. Varkesh could have ended him in less than a heartbeat. Even drained, even restrained by biological inertia after centuries of confinement, he was devastation incarnate. A flare of plasma would have reduced the habitation dome to vapor. A single swipe of talon could have cracked the moon's crust. Instead, he asked why. It was not the interrogative snarl he had offered council delegates centuries ago. It was quieter. It was tired. And it was the first genuine question he had posed in 300 years. Ilias had rehearsed many answers during sleepless nights aboard his patched exploration vessel. He discarded them all. "You were born in a supernova cluster," he said. "Your species metabolizes stellar radiation. When the coalition harvested those stars for fuel, your nesting grounds destabilized." Varkesh's eye narrowed. "They did not intend extinction," Ilias continued. "They intended progress. You retaliated. You justified genocide." The dragon's growl shook loose shards of rock from nearby cliffs. "No," Ilias said firmly, "I recognize escalation." Silence expanded between them, taut as a drawn wire. "You were wrong," Ilias went on. "You destroyed worlds that had no direct hand in your suffering. They were wrong first. They destabilized your ecosystem without understanding it. 300 years of suffering won't balance that equation." The wind hissed across the plain. But maybe, Ilya said softly, we can stop adding to it. The dragon studied him. A creature born in stellar violence, who had watched his kind unravel in engineered catastrophes, who had answered grief with annihilation and paid for it in chains, now stood on barren rock before a being fragile enough to be crushed beneath a careless step. For the first time since his capture, Varkesh folded his wings without resistance. Not in submission. In consideration. The first days were a study in proximity without trust. Varkesh did not approach the habitation dome. He selected a crater several kilometers away and coiled within it, his presence warping the air with residual heat. Ilias respected the distance. He worked. He assembled additional atmospheric processors, guided by schematics flickering across his wrist slate. He deployed autonomous drones to drill geothermal shafts. He calibrated solar arrays tuned to the dimmer spectrum of the orange star. Every action was deliberate, visible. No hidden weapons, no orbital reinforcements. The galaxy watched, breath-tight with anticipation. If Varkesh chose violence, there would be no stopping him in time. On the fourth day, Ilias felt the shadow fall again. He turned to find the dragon looming beside a half-assembled geothermal stabilizer, an intricate lattice designed to tap the moon's internal heat without triggering seismic collapse. You attempt to coax warmth from dead stone, Varkesh observed. I attempt to make it less dead, Ilias replied. The dragon's nostrils flared, releasing a thin ribbon of heat that shimmered against alloy. You have misaligned the intake conduits. Ilias glanced at the structure. I followed the manual. The manual was written for machines incapable of sensing stress fractures. Before Ilias could respond, Varkesh extended one talon. Delicately, absurdly delicately for something the size of a skyscraper, he adjusted the conduit by a fraction of a degree. Your geothermal draw would have destabilized within 3 rotations, he said. Ilias blinked, thank you. The dragon recoiled slightly at the phrase, as though it were foreign. He retreated without further comment. Across the galaxy, analysts froze the footage, replaying it frame by frame. The Ash Tyrant had corrected engineering. He had not destroyed it. Weeks stretched into months. Trust did not arrive as revelation, it accumulated in increments. Varkesh began to roam the moon's surface, mapping fault lines with instinct honed in stellar storms. He carved irrigation channels through bedrock with controlled bursts of plasma so precise they fused stone into smooth conduits rather than slagged ruin. When imported microbial cultures were seeded into warmed soil, he hovered above them at night, radiating measured heat to accelerate atmospheric binding. He did not call it nurturing. Ilias did not label it redemption. They worked. There were arguments. Varkesh viewed the atmospheric processors as inefficient. You constrict the natural flow, he would rumble, release pressure, let convection build. If I let convection build unchecked, Ilias countered, we'll get hurricane-force winds before we get breathable air. Wind is strength. Wind is also erosion. I'd like the dome to remain upright. Their debates echoed across rock plains, sometimes escalating into thunderous exchanges that caused distant monitoring stations to issue alerts. Yet the arguments ended not in flame but in adjustment. Ilias modified processor algorithms to account for the dragon's suggestions. Varkesh experimented with lower-intensity thermal bursts to avoid destabilizing seeded soil. They learned each other's limits. Evenings, if the dimming of the orange star could be called evening, brought a different ritual. Ilias would sit outside the habitation dome, portable heater at his side more for comfort than necessity. Varkesh would coil nearby, massive silhouette etched against alien twilight. On my world, Ilias said once, setting up a magnetic chessboard on a flat stone, we used to fight wars over territory smaller than this moon. You still do, Varkesh observed dryly. Fair point. He arranged pieces. You believe in contest without annihilation, the dragon mused, observing the board. Explain. It's a strategy game. The goal is to trap the opposing king. And then you stop. Varkesh's eyes glowed faintly. You do not consume him. No, curious. Ilias moved a pawn forward. Your turn. At first, Varkesh scoffed at the simplicity. Then he began to see patterns. Within weeks, he dismantled Ilias' defenses with ruthless efficiency, predicting moves several turns ahead. Yet he never overturned the board in frustration when Ilias surprised him. He analyzed. Adapted. Once after a particularly intricate exchange, Varkesh paused. You restrict violence by rule, he said slowly. You simulate war to avoid waging it. That's the idea. He considered this long after the game ended. The galaxy waited for betrayal. News cycles speculated daily. Dragon activity increases, precursor to aggression. Human idealism, noble or naive. Survivor groups from Halcyon held vigils, broadcasting prayers for vigilance. Some demanded preemptive orbital strikes. The Council maintained distant surveillance but did not interfere. On Hearth life, primitive, microscopic, stubborn began to take root. The atmosphere thickened by fractional percentages. Lichen-like organisms spread across warmed rock. Meltwater pooled in carved channels. The moon, once sterile, whispered of possibility. One afternoon, seismic monitors spiked. Elias rushed from the dome to find Varkesh hovering above a newly formed fissure. Heat poured from the crack, unstable and rising. You overextended the geothermal draw, the dragon accused. Elias scanned his slate. The processors are within tolerance. The planet disagrees. Without waiting for instruction, Varkesh plunged his claws into the fissure and exhaled, not flame, but controlled thermal energy directed downward. He redirected pressure along subsurface veins, stabilizing the crust through instinctive manipulation of heat gradients. The tremors subsided. Steam curled upward in gentle plumes instead of explosive jets. Elias exhaled slowly. You just saved the entire eastern quadrant. I saved the structure we have built, Varkesh corrected. Elias smiled faintly, same thing. The dragon did not contradict him. Laughter, when it came, startled them both. It happened after Elias attempted to explain human music. You compress sound into patterned frequencies, Varkesh said skeptically. To what end? Emotional expression. Your species requires assistance to feel. Sometimes we need help understanding what we're feeling. Varkesh emitted a low resonance approximating a snort. I will demonstrate superior expression. He inhaled. Elias braced for devastation. Instead, Varkesh released a series of modulated rumbles and harmonic vibrations that resonated through the moon's crust. The ground hummed in layered tones, a deep bass undercurrent accompanied by higher oscillations generated through subtle wing movements. The effect was haunting. Elias stared wide-eyed. That, the dragon declared, is music. Elias began to laugh, helpless, delighted, overwhelmed by the absurdity of being serenaded by a former galactic scourge through tectonic percussion. After a moment, Varkesh's rumble shifted. It aligned with Elias' laughter. Not mockery. Participation. The watching galaxy replayed that clip more than any other. There were setbacks. Memories did not dissolve with good intentions. Sometimes, when Hearth's orange star flared unexpectedly, Varkesh would rear skyward, instinct screaming of unstable clusters and impending collapse. His breath would ignite reflexively, scorching barren rock before he mastered himself. Elias never chastised. He would stand nearby, offering grounding facts. Solar activity spike within predicted range, no extraction arrays in orbit, no destabilization. Gradually, the reflex shortened. Gradually, the flame subsided faster. Trust, Elias learned, was not built through grand gestures but through consistency. And Varkesh, though ancient beyond human reckoning, was learning too. He learned that not every silence preceded attack. He learned that proximity need not end in chains. He learned that heat could nurture as well as destroy. One evening, as the first hardy shrubs, genetically engineered for resilience, took root along a carved channel, Elias stood beside Varkesh watching their leaves tremble in faint wind. You could leave, Elias said quietly. There's nothing physically stopping you. The dragon's gaze remained on the horizon. And go where? Anywhere. Anywhere, Varkesh echoed. I have traversed supernovae. I have carved my name across star maps in flame. Everywhere I have gone, I have carried devastation. He lowered his head slightly. Here, he continued, I carry irrigation. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. That's progress. It is unfamiliar. Does that bother you? Oh yes. A pause. Then no. The orange star dipped lower, casting long shadows across budding green. For 3 centuries, Varkesh said slowly, I was monument, warning, trophy. His wings shifted, not in aggression but in uneasy rest. Here I am's function. Elias nodded, a house needs fire. Varkesh regarded him sidelong, you have built me a house. Elias gestured to the moon around them, the channels, the processors, the first fragile ecosystem. A house for fire, he said. The dragon's gaze lingered on the growing shrubs, on the thin atmosphere catching starlight differently than barren rock once had. Something vast and ancient shifted within him, not the blaze of conquest but the quieter burn of purpose. The galaxy continued to watch, waiting for catastrophe. Instead, it witnessed a dragon adjusting irrigation flow with meticulous care. It saw a being once known as the Ash Tyrant hovering gently above saplings to shield them from unexpected frost. It heard debates about chess strategies and atmospheric chemistry echoing across stone plains. And slowly, impossibly, the barren moon began to bloom. When the past returned, peace rarely goes unchallenged. On Hearth the air had grown thicker. Not breathable for a human without assistance, not yet, but no longer the sterile whisper it had once been. Clouds formed in thin, fragile streaks across the sky. Meltwater threaded through channels Varkesh had carved with disciplined flame. Hardy shrubs anchored soil that had known only vacuum and radiation. The moon no longer felt empty. It felt possible. That was when the past arrived. The first warning came as a tremor in subspace, a distortion too sharp, too deliberate to be natural. Elias was inside the habitation dome, reviewing atmospheric stabilization metrics, when his console flickered red. A cascade of encrypted signatures flooded the display. Multiple hyperspace ruptures. Mass signatures heavy. Military. His pulse spiked. No, he breathed. He ran outside. The sky above Hearth, once a quiet expanse pierced by the dim orange glow of its star, shimmered violently. Reality peeled open in concentric fractures of light as ships tore free from faster-than-light corridors. They emerged in formation. Cruisers bristling with plasma lances, frigates humming with missile racks, carriers deploying drone swarms that glittered like metallic insects against starlight. Dozens. No coalition insignia flashed on their hulls. But Elias recognized the architecture. Halcyon descent lines. Pelithar remnants. Velcran vengeance guilds. A radical coalition of survivors who had never accepted the Council's experiment. Officially, it was an unsanctioned operation. Unofficially, several counselors had looked away. Because grief, when passed down through generations, does not fade. It calcifies. Varkesh felt them before he saw them. He lifted his head from where he had been coiled beside a line of saplings, their leaves trembling in the wind. His pupils narrowed to slits as hyperspace ruptures scarred the sky. The scent of ionized propulsion carried memory. War. Elias stood a short distance away, face pale as data streamed across his wrist slate. They didn't file transit through coalition channels, Elias said hoarsely. They masked the jump. Varkesh's gaze remained fixed upward. His body shifted, muscles coiling not in panic but readiness. They will not stop, the dragon said softly. Elias swallowed, no. High orbit filled with steel. The lead cruiser rotated, its forward cannons aligning with Hearth's surface. Targeting arrays flickered, scanning for heat signatures, for life. For him, I could destroy them, Varkesh said. It was not a boast. It was a calculation. Elias closed his eyes briefly, yes. Above them, weapons charged, plasma condensing into white-hot spears. And prove them correct, Varkesh finished. Silence stretched between them, heavier than gravity. For centuries, he had defined himself by fire and fury. He had been the storm civilizations rallied against. His very name had justified megastructures and military doctrines. Redemption had not been a revelation. It had been fragile. A hatchling learning to breathe without burning. Now the galaxy offered him a choice. Return to the simplicity of annihilation. Or endure being hunted as something else. The first barrage descended. Light ripped through atmosphere, ionizing the thin sky into screaming auroras. Plasma bolts struck the plane where Elias had stood seconds before, vaporizing rock into glass. Varkesh moved. Not toward the ships. Toward Elias. He shielded the habitation dome with one massive wing, scales flaring bright as impacts detonated against him. The force drove him back several meters, claws carving trenches into soil he had helped nurture. Ilya staggered but remained upright. More fire fell. This time Varkesh did not remain grounded. He launched. The shockwave flattened nearby shrubs. Stone shattered beneath the force of his takeoff. He punched through Hearth's fragile atmosphere like a meteor in reverse, trailing incandescent wake. The fleet adjusted targeting. Engage, a voice echoed across open channels, broadcast unintentionally through overlapping frequencies. Missiles streaked outward in coordinated arcs. Varkesh rose into orbit alone. Sensor logs would later be replayed across every major network from the core worlds to the fringe colonies. They would show something no strategist had predicted. The Ash Tyrant did not charge headlong into the fleet with apocalyptic fury. He weaved. Missiles converged from multiple vectors, their warheads calibrated to detonate in gravitationally disruptive bursts designed specifically for large-scale biological threats. Varkesh twisted mid-flight, wings folding tight against his body. The first detonation bloomed behind him instead of around him, shockwaves rippling across scales that absorbed and redirected heat. A second missile struck his flank. The explosion tore a jagged scar through outer plating, molten crystal spraying into vacuum. He did not roar. He adjusted trajectory. Closing distance, he exhaled, not a planet-cracking inferno, but a focused beam of thermal energy narrower than a cruiser's hull. It sliced cleanly through the lead ship's primary engine array. Propulsion flared erratically. The cruiser spun out of formation, powerless but intact. Varkesh banked sharply as plasma lances carved luminous lines past him. One grazed his wing membrane, searing through tissue that had only recently healed from Nullspire's crush. Pain flared. Old instincts screamed, burn them all. He suppressed it. Instead of targeting the ship's bridge, he dove beneath its ventral side and raked talons across weapons' mounts, crippling cannons without breaching crew compartments. Drone swarms descended. Thousands of autonomous units armed with micro-torpedoes. He inhaled deeply. For a heartbeat, observers feared the worst. He released a shockwave, not fire, but a concussive blast generated by rapid expansion of superheated plasma directed outward in a controlled sphere. The drones shattered mid-flight, rendered inert without collateral detonation. Frigates attempted flanking maneuvers. Varkesh accelerated, using gravitational slingshot arcs around Hearth's orbit to alter vectors unpredictably. He tore through missile racks with surgical precision, melting guidance systems instead of fuel reserves. One cruiser larger than the rest powered its spinal cannon, a weapon designed for planetary bombardment. The charge built bright enough to rival the system's star. Varkesh saw the targeting lock shift from him to the moon below. To the irrigation channels. To the forest in progress. To Ilya's. Rage surged raw incandescent. He dove straight toward the cannon's mouth. The beam fired. It struck him full in the chest. For a moment, he vanished in blinding light. Shockwaves rippled across orbit. Fragments of scale vaporized. When the glare faded, Varkesh still flew. Charred, smoking, but alive. He clamped his jaws around the cannon's barrel and released a burst of heat calibrated not to explode the ship, but to liquefy its firing chamber. The weapon sagged useless. Then he tore it free. He could have hurled it through the bridge. Instead, he cast it into open space. Below, Ilias watched through magnified visor feed, heart hammering so violently he could hear it in his ears. Every impact against Varkesh's body felt like a personal wound. Don't, Ilias whispered to no one and everyone, don't give them what they want. Up above, the battle shifted. Ships that had expected a berserker found themselves facing a guardian. One by one, engines died. Weapons arrays melted into slag. Hull plating buckled under precise strikes that spared life support systems. Communications channels filled with confusion. He's not targeting crew compartments. Reroute powers. Engine failure, repeat, engine failure. Within 47 minutes, the Armada's formation had dissolved into drifting wreckage. No ships exploded. None were obliterated. They floated powerless in Hearth's orbit, scarred but survivable. Varkesh hovered among them, wings torn anew, blood molten and luminous, trailing in faint arcs. He could end it now. A single sustained inferno would reduce the fleet to debris. The past roared in his veins. The present whispered beneath him, a moon slowly learning to breathe. He turned away. Re-entry was less graceful. His injuries slowed him. Damaged wing membranes struggled against atmospheric friction. He struck Hearth's surface hard enough to fracture newly formed rock layers. The impact sent shockwaves through irrigation channels, water sloshing violently but holding. Elias ran. The ground was hot beneath his boots. Smoke curled from fissures in Varkesh's scales. One wing lay twisted, membrane shredded and bleeding incandescent fluid that hissed on contact with soil. Varkesh, Elias shouted, skidding to a stop beside the dragon's massive head. One eye opened, dimmer than before. You could have stayed in orbit, Elias said breathlessly. You're losing heat. Varkesh exhaled weakly. Hearth required atmosphere. Even wounded, he had modulated re-entry to avoid igniting the sky. Elias pressed a gloved hand against heated scales, ignoring the burn that seeped through insulation. You could have ended them, he whispered. Yes, Varkesh rasped. Above, the disabled fleet drifted in humiliating silence. But I am tired of ending things. The words were rough, torn from somewhere deeper than lungs. Elias swallowed hard. Emergency transmissions flooded subspace. Survivor fleets broadcasting distress. Civilian networks replaying battle footage from dozens of angles. The narrative fractured and reassembled in real time. The most hated dragon in Starshelter had defended a moon. Had shielded a human. Had crippled a fleet without slaughter. In council chambers far away, delegates watched in stunned quiet. No one cheered. No one spoke. For centuries, Varkesh had been a symbol of justified fear. Now he was something more complicated. A mirrors. Across the galaxy, survivor descendants stared at screens showing ships intact, crew alive, rescued by their own emergency protocols. Some wept not from fresh grief but from confusion. They had come seeking righteous annihilation. They had been spared. On Hearth, days passed in slow recovery. Elias worked without sleep, applying thermal stabilizers, recalibrating geothermal flow to compensate for Varkesh's diminished heat output. He rerouted atmospheric processors to circulate warmth toward the dragon's resting place. Varkesh endured the pain in silence. Occasionally, his tail would twitch when distant rescue vessels arrived to tow disabled warships from orbit. He did not watch. Do you regret it? Elias asked once, seated beside the dragon as stars emerged overhead. Regret, Varkesh's voice was faint but steady. Not destroying them. A long pause. I regret, Varkesh said slowly, that I once believed destruction was clarity. Elias considered that. Then now? Now, the dragon replied, gaze settling on the thin clouds drifting above. Clarity is restraint. The first true rain fell that night. Not a storm. Just droplets light, tentative, condensing from atmosphere painstakingly cultivated over months. They struck Varkesh's scales and evaporated in soft hisses. They struck soil and remained. Elias tilted his face upward, laughing quietly through exhaustion. Varkesh watched the water bead along emerging leaves. I have ended many forests, he murmured. Then help me grow this one, Elias said. The broadcast of the battle spread faster than any war report in recorded history. Not because of spectacle, but because of what had not happened. Commentators struggled to categorize it. Was it mercy? Strategy? Weakness? The footage showed something simpler. Choice. The Ash Tyrant had been given opportunity for total annihilation. He had chosen otherwise. Not because he lacked power, but because a human had believed he could be more than his worst act. Months later, when Varkesh's wings had healed and Hearth's forest had thickened into genuine groves, a delegation arrived, this time openly sanctioned by the coalition. They did not come with weapons primed. They came with soil samples, with seedlings from worlds Varkesh had once scarred. They stood at the edge of the growing forest, uncertain. Elias watched Varkesh carefully. The dragon lowered his massive head, not in submission but acknowledgement. Saplings were planted, roots intertwined with Hearth's earth. The past did not vanish. It stood there in shared silence. But it no longer dictated the future alone. Years later, scholars would mark that battle as a turning point, not merely in the story of a dragon, but in the political psychology of a galaxy. If a creature born in stellar fire could change, what excuse did anyone else have? On a once barren moon orbiting a quiet orange star, beneath clouds that had not existed a year before, a dragon and a human stood at the edge of a forest. Wind moved through leaves, carrying the scent of growth. Varkesh exhaled gently, warming saplings against unexpected chill. Elias smiled. In a universe forged by violence, creation had followed destruction. Not as denial, as defiance.